Ah, Rose de Saulce de Freycinet, an aristocrat, a young woman from a humble background who married a 35-year-old Louis Claude de Saulce de Freycinet, a French aristocrat. The French Navy gave her husband to command of a scientific round-the-world expedition 3 years later, and the couple hatched a plan. She smuggled aboard dressed as a man. This is full of great stories, this book. I absolutely love it. At first she stayed hidden in her cabin, and then once the ship had made its last stop in Europe, the captain revealed his secret. It got shipwrecked off the coast of the Falkland Islands. On the return voyage, the crew were able to return home safely with their findings and collections. No mention of her in the official reports, of course, but she talks about the places she visits, the people she met, the husband's scientific work, battling through treacherous seas, placating hostile islanders, attending balls in Mauritius and Sydney. She died, tragically, of cholera at 38. But they're the first written account by a woman who circumnavigated the globe. She didn't intend to have that journal published. Stunning writing again. What saved us from peril was our gaiety. I got out my castanet and box of magic tricks. So she obviously placated hostile islanders. I shall begin my journal from the moment when, leaving my home in Toulon at midnight, I made my way alone to the house of one of my friends. There I spent a very restless night, thinking of the somewhat daring adventure which I was to embark upon, and the dear ones I was about to leave behind for so long, and whom I might never see again. I spent the whole of the following day writing my farewell letters, and that night, around 11:30 p.m., I donned my male attire, accompanied by Lewis and one of his friends. I headed for the harbour to go aboard the ship. Here we have Eugène Delacroix, an artist, a unique portrait of one of France's greatest painters. It insights into character and temperament and highlights the technical skills that made him an artistic genius. He was writing this journal for his eyes alone, hoping that it would help him to understand his sudden shifts of mood from exaltation to despair. Potentially bipolar, had mental health struggles, and that actually, writing a journal of your experiences can advocate for that. It's quite a useful way of ordering one's thoughts and examining one's, like it says here, temperament. He was a man of contrast. He loved painting scenes of savagery and violence, horses and lions fighting each other, despots butchering their concubines, victims cowering pitiably after a massacre, but his own way of life was refined and civilized. His friend, the poet Charles Baudelaire, put it succinctly: Delacroix was passionately in love with passion, but coldly determined to express this passion as clearly as possible. The mask is everything is a phrase that he repeated several times in the journal. Nothing is so real to me as the illusions I create with my painting. The rest is shifting sand. Here is some more in detail. He of course painted the famous Liberty leading the people, if you weren't too familiar who Delacroix were. And if you're not familiar with this painting, it is also used in the cover of Coldplay's Viva La Vida. So there you go, you've got a reference point there. It's tall, narrow notebooks, similar to those for house keeping accounts. I confess that I have worked logically. I, who have no love for logical painting, I see now that my turbulent mind needs activity, that it must break out and try 100 different ways before reaching the goal towards which I am always straining. There is in me an old leaven, some black depth which must be appeased. If I am not quivering and excited like a serpent in the coils of a pythoness, i.e. a female soothsayer, I am without inspiration. I must recognize this and accept it. Everything good that I have done has come to me in this way. They do say, the greatest artists often feel, they've been through hardship, they've had pain, they've had loss, they've had struggles. Hey, you've got a writer in crisis, a Scottish Sir Walter Scott, the novelist. He faced a crisis. He had already become successful and famous and invested a lot of his money in a printing company which collapsed as a result of a banking crash. So he was deeply in debt. He recorded the profound effects of this in his journal, and kept it almost daily until shortly before his death, where the text ends in mid-sentence. It describes how he resolved to work intensively to produce best-selling books so that he could pay off all his creditors. How these stresses led to a series of strokes that incapacitated him, the death of his wife, his progress on books, earnings, and the travels he made to Naples, Pompeii, and Malta in the hope of improving his health. Wow, he had it bad. He writes in a pacey, fluent style, much influenced by that of earlier diaries, such as those of Pepys, which had recently been published. He begins his journey by recalling his regret that he'd never kept a regular diary. He notes that Byron did not write every day, but recorded events that came to mind, making his descriptions as lively and entertaining as possible. And then just 2 days later he reveals the financial worries that will dominate the rest of his life. What a life mine has been, half-educated, almost wholly neglected, or left to myself, stuffing my head with the most nonsensical trash, and undervalued in society for a time by most of my companions, getting forward and held a bold and clever fellow, contrary to the opinion of all who thought me a mere dreamer, rich and poor 4 or 5 times, once on the verge of ruin, yet open new sources of wealth almost overflowing, now taken in my pitch of pride and nearly winged because London chooses to be in an uproar, and in a tumult of bulls and bears a poor inoffensive lion like myself is pushed to the wall. It's probably a story that can be replicated through the ages with every boom and bust. Look, we have Charles Darwin, the naturalist, and of course various documents have survived from the voyage of the Beagle that set out across the Atlantic Ocean to chart the coastland of South America, and 18 small notebooks filled with copious observations by the graduate Charles Darwin, who was then only 22 years old, was on board as a gentleman naturalist and carried them everywhere. Of course, Darwin, massively influential on modern life. About 9 o'clock we were near to the coast of Brazil. The delight one experiences in such times bewilders the minds. If the eye attempts to follow the flight of a gaudy butterfly, it is arrested by some strange tree or fruit. If watching an insect, one forgets it in the stranger flower it is crawling over. If turning to admire the splendour of the scenery, the individual character of the foreground fixes the attention. The mind is a chaos of delight, out of which a world of future and more quiet pleasure will arise. Beautifully written. And of course, in detail, we have here the Tree of Life, titled I Think. Darwin first sketched how species might diversify and evolve like the branches of an imaginary tree, and this soon came to symbolize his theory of evolution by natural selection. So the main text reads, thus between A and B, immense kappa relation, C and B the finest gradation, B and D rather greater distinction, thus genera would be formed, bearing relation. Just titled I Think. I love that he was probably just sitting there and he was like, hang on a minute, let's just put all of this down. Oh wow, I didn't realise that Queen Victoria had a journal. She kept a daily journal, even before she became ruler. She began in 1832 when she was just 13 years old and carried on with a few breaks until the very end of her life. It's very interesting. She did lovely sketches there. Sketches of her family or people she met. Princess Beatrice cut many of these drawings out of the pages of the Queen's original diaries before destroying them. Why did she do that? Princess Beatrice and some... so the text that survives consists of 13 early volumes in Victoria's handwriting, some additional drafts, 111 volumes of transcriptions made by her daughter, Princess Beatrice, and some typed, unedited copies made for the historian Lord Esher. Beatrice made her transcriptions because Victoria wanted the diaries to be preserved without passages that might upset members of the royal family, and for the originals to be destroyed. She therefore cut many passages, especially those describing Victoria's relationship with her husband and her friendships with male companions of her later years, such as her Indian attendant Muhammad Abdul Karim. Even without these, it's a fascinating personal account of the monarch's life. Very juicy elements cut out there. I never spent such an evening. My dearest dear Albert, his excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms and we kissed each other again and again. His beauty, his sweetness and gentleness. Really, how can I ever be thankful enough to have such a husband? To be called by names of tenderness I have never yet heard used to me before was bliss beyond belief. Oh, this was the happiest day of my life. That's incredibly sweet. Of course, Victoria and Albert's relationship, very famous for its enduring love. We have here the journals of the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, a pensive young man in rebellion against a strict Protestant upbringing. By the time he died in 1855, having become a celebrated author and thinker, his reflections filled more than 7,000 pages of journals and notebooks, which provide an insight into the intellectual and spiritual ferment of one of the most enigmatic writers of the 19th century. Lived in Copenhagen and Denmark all his life, and they included fiction, critical essays and theology in his works, but he's best known as the existentialist philosopher engaged in an anguished quest for personal truth, the idea for which I am willing to live and die. Some of the journal's most moving passages are about the author's doom-laden father, a domineering self-made man who'd risen from poverty and was possessed by an ineradicable sense of sin. What I really need is to be clear about what I am to do, not what I must know, except insofar as knowledge must precede every action. It is a question of understanding my destiny, of seeing what the deity really wants me to do. The thing is to find a truth which is true for me, to find the idea for which I am willing to live and die. What use would it be to be able to propound the meaning of Christianity if it had no deeper meaning for myself and my life? What use would it be if truth were to stand before me cold and naked, not caring whether I acknowledged it or not? You can hear the energy and the strife in his writing. John Ruskin, the writer, of course the art critic, social reformer, philanthropist, travelled a lot in Europe and was interested in lots of subjects from painting to the political economy. Kept a diary on and drew the things that he saw in his travels, such as landscapes and flowers and ancient buildings in particular. The plight, observations also included the plight of the working man. I think that's where I'm familiar with the work of Ruskin. But at the end of the range, right over Murano, burning crests of snow were seen mingled among bars of cloud and gaps of sky, relieved against grey sea cloud behind. The sun was near setting, the calm space of sky changed not, the clouds, as motionless as the hills and as defined, held up their waved curtain from off the field of gold, and the dark mountain chain, countless in its serrations and gathering together of pointed peaks, lay as sharp and shattered against the amber air as if it had been a mass of near highland hills. Beautifully written. And in detail here we have lovely watercolour study of a kingfisher here. Looking back, these two pages contain diary entries written 5 years apart. The paragraph from April 1883 records a day when Ruskin was apparently in good health, receiving letters, visiting friends, doing some drawing. The opposite page is written in February 1878, when he had his first mental breakdown. The handwriting here looks fast and fluent, but Ruskin's prose is disconnected and far less coherent. Charlotte Bronte, a very famous novelist, of course, famous as the author of Jane Eyre. She grew up in the family at Holworth, Yorkshire, with her father, brother Bramwell, and 2 sisters, who were also writers. And she and her siblings made miniature books like this when they were young, writing in tiny sheets of paper, filling them with stories about imaginary worlds, and Charlotte's Rowhead journal mixes descriptions of her daily life with further episodes of these fantasy stories. The accounts of Rowhead are quite bleak. It's clear that although she was a good teacher and was liked by the school's head, she felt suffocated and lonely. Extreme local weather, which she likes, but expresses her loneliness, struggles to adjust to life as a teacher, her frustration at being stuck at remote Rowhead. And this is a contrast between the place in which she finds herself in the imaginary worlds of Angria, Glasstown and Verdopolis. So it's interesting, it's kind of like half journal, half fantasy. This is typical of her. One of them I'm just going to write because I can't help it. So Charlotte then describes where she is and what she's doing. Her frustration with her situation at Rowhead subsequently gives way to yearning for Haworth and her family. This in turn segues into fantasizing about the imaginary subjects of the stories that she and Branwell wrote together when she was still at home. Henry David Thoreau, the writer, a chronicler of nature, American, genuine all-rounder, and promoted the idea of community parks and leading by example, showed how to live a simpler life in an increasingly complex world. Born in Concord, Massachusetts, he spent most of his life in New England, ran a private school with his brother, but of course had a friendship with the transcendentalist philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson, worked in his household for a number of years and lived in a cabin in his land. Live in each session as it passes, breathe the air, drink the drink, taste the fruit, and resign yourself to the influences of each. Let them be your only diet. In August, live on berries, not dried meats, and pemmican, as if you were on shipboard, making your way through a waste ocean, or in a northern desert. Be blown on by all of the winds, open all your pores, and bathe in all the tides of nature, in all her streams and oceans, at all seasons. Wonderful. Beautiful paintings and illustrations here. A life in the woods. I'm impressed by feather markings, making botanical notes. Wonderful. It's getting really sunny and shadowy now, so I really apologise if you can't see the top end of this now, but this is Leo Tolstoy, the writer, the great Russian novelist, born into a long line of nobles at his family's country estate and kept diaries for most of his adult life. Of course, Tolstoy wrote War and Peace, the vast epic about the lives of 5 Russian families during the Napoleonic Wars, of course. But he enjoys, although he enjoys great privilege and wealth, he showed unusual concern for members of the lower classes and came to believe that over time his social position was so unfair that he wanted to give most of his wealth away. I had counted much upon this period, yet to my sorrow find that I always remain the same. Within a few days I have done all the things which I disapproved. Abrupt changes are impossible. Several times recently I have shown myself weak, both in ordinary relations with men and in danger and in card play, and am still held back by false shame. I have told many lies, I have been idling away my time, and even now cannot collect my thoughts, and although writing, I feel no inclination to write. His diary became more philosophical and dour in the last 10 years of his life. This was just 2 months before he died, and comments on his health and the visit of friends. He also records letters he has sent and receives, and among these are the ones he wrote to the Indian political leader Gandhi, who he refers to as the Hindu. A true work of art is produced only when the artist seeks, strives. We have Henry Bates, the entomologist here, voyaging into the Amazon, and spent time studying insects near his home in Leicester and became a skilled entomologist. And then after he met Alfred Russel Wallace, the 2 men went on a trip to Brazil to research the wildlife of the Amazon, a region that was scarcely known to scientists at the time, and he stayed there for 11 years. He used small pocket books to record everything that he saw, all the dangers, all the diseases, and it fascinated Charles Darwin, which also helped him provide theory through his proof of natural selection, particularly his work on toxicity in species. On these expanded membranes, butterfly wings, nature writes as on a tablet the story of the modification of species, so truly do all changes of the organisation register themselves thereon. Moreover, the same colour patterns of the wings generally show with great regularity the degrees of blood relationship of the species, as the laws of nature must be the same for all beings. The conclusions furnished by this group of insects must be applicable to the whole organic world. Therefore, the study of butterflies, creatures selected as the types of airness and frivolity instead of being despised, will someday be valued as one of the most important branches of biological science. Don't think he's wrong. Here you have the Goncourt brothers, writers, literary gossips in Paris. They wrote many books together, took it in turns to write, one gathering the text of the other. That's an interesting relationship. You couldn't tell them apart, but includes historic events such as the Franco-Prussian War, the Siege of Paris, the suppression of the Paris Commune. Covers 45 years, a very gossipy chronicle of the literary and artistic circles of Paris. Nobody knows why they kept the journal, but it was partly to vent their frustration at the disappointing sales and poor reviews of their books. They generally wrote these at night, while the memory of the day was fresh in the memory. Brothers didn't publish it at first, but in 1886 Edmund published selections from it, and their frankness offended some of the people mentioned. In context, it provides vivid pictures of French artists and writers at the time. Our admirer and pupil Zola came to lunch today. It was the first time we ever had seen him. Our immediate impression was of a worn-out Normalian, at once sturdy and puny, with Sarsi's neck and shoulders and a waxy anemic complexion. A strapping young fellow with something of the delicate modelling of fine porcelain in his features, in the line of his eyes, in the angry planes of his nose, and in his hands. The whole of his person was built rather like his characters, with two contrary types mingling male and female in them. Yes, I can see that they very gossipy. And that, of course, brings us on to the next chapter, which we will pause for there and move on to into a third part. It's proving quite the journey through this wonderful book, isn't it? Thank you for joining me for this fantastic, fascinating voyage into the diaries and journals of people throughout history. I look forward to having you join me next time, but until then,